Summer in Winter's Peak was always hot, sticky, and never-ending. But that night, the air turned weirdly cold. On an empty street lit by a few flickering lamps, there stood a snow-white ice cream truck. Its engine rumbled like a hungry beast, and its familiar jingle played so slow and creepy it made Jack's skin crawl. From his bedroom window, Jack watched as the truck's door creaked open. A tall figure stepped out, moving like it was dragging some invisible weight. A trail of mist followed him, like he'd just walked out of a freezer. The neighbor girl, Lily, was standing on the curb, clutching a coin in her tiny hand. Jack wanted to shout, to warn her, but it was like something had frozen him in place. She took one step toward the truck, then another, and vanished. No scream, no sound, just the slam of the door. Jack didn't sleep that night, and by morning, it was like Lily had never even existed. After Lily disappeared, something shifted in Winter's Peak. Jack could feel it in his bones. The town seemed the same, sure, but every time his eyes landed on that ice cream truck, the illusion shattered. Its gleaming white body practically sparkled in the sunlight, yet somehow it gave off this eerie chill. And still, kids ran to it like moths to a flame, drawn in as if the thing had some magnetic pull. Jack couldn't shake the memory of that night. Lily's terrified face, the sound of the truck's door slamming shut. It burned in his mind. He tried to tell the adults, but no one listened. His mum brushed it off as a bad dream, and his dad just told him to stop watching so many horror movies. But the weirdness didn't stop. Every evening the truck parked on a new street, like it was following some creepy schedule. And every time Jack heard its jingle echoing through the neighborhood, his heart clenched like a fist. One day, Jack made up his mind to follow the truck. Hiding behind some bushes, he watched as the ice cream man handed out treats to the kids. But his hands... something was off about them. Too big, with long bony fingers that bent in ways they shouldn't. At one point, a boy dropped his coin. The seller crouched down to pick it up, and as he did, his hood slipped off. The face... it wasn't human. Thick fur covered his forehead, and his eyes were small, yellow, and animal-like. Jack held his breath, heart pounding. But then the seller's gaze snapped straight to him. Tommy's disappearance wasn't the first, but it was the one that shook the town. Tommy was a loudmouth, a troublemaker everyone knew but nobody really liked. Kid probably ran away, sick of his parents fighting all the time, the adults said. But Jack knew better. Tommy wasn't the runaway type. If anything, he'd steal a school bus and joyride to Vegas before just vanishing. Jack's mum, like most parents in Winter's Peak, banned him from staying out late. But honestly, the days didn't feel any safer than the nights. That truck kept showing up in different places, pulling kids in like a magnet. And Jack started noticing something weird. The jingle. It sounded slower now, like it was haunting, hypnotic. Jack began keeping track of the disappearances. In his beat-up notebook, he scribbled down a chilling pattern. Every time the truck rolled into a new street, a kid went missing. It was so obvious to him, but somehow none of the adults seemed to catch on. And that made Jack furious. He tried telling his friend Pete. Pete was younger and didn't always get what Jack was saying, but he was a good listener. Just watch it for yourself, man. It's not just a truck. It's a trap. It's picking us off, one by one. What if Tommy did run away, though? Pete said hesitantly. I mean, maybe he's hiding in the woods or something. Then why's all his stuff still at home? His bike? His baseball gloves? They're all there. Same with Lily. She wouldn't even step outside after dark, let alone run away. Pete scratched his head, reluctantly nodding. That's when Jack hit him with his plan. Tomorrow night, we're gonna follow it. We'll see where it goes. We'll find out the truth ourselves. The truck showed up on the edge of town, near the old park. Jack and Pete crouched behind some bushes, watching as kids gathered around. 2 boys and a girl bought their ice cream and ran off to play like it was no big deal. It all looked normal. But Jack didn't take his eyes off the truck. He knew better. This was just part of the act. When the kids were gone, the truck let out a low rumble, almost like it was waking up. Its taillights flickered, and it started rolling toward the woods. "Well, we going or not?" Jack whispered. But Pete hesitated. "Dude, this feels like a really bad idea." "Fine, go home if you're scared," Jack snapped. Pete swallowed hard, his pride winning out. "I'm coming." They crept along the path, trying not to make a sound. The farther the truck went into the woods, the colder the air got. It didn't make sense. Summer nights weren't supposed to feel like this. Jack's skin prickled, and with every step, it felt like something was listening. The truck finally stopped near an old rundown warehouse. "Now what?" Pete whispered, his voice shaky. "We watch first," Jack replied, keeping his voice low. They moved closer, hiding behind a cluster of trees. The truck looked empty, but the engine was still running. Jack's eyes locked on the warehouse. A faint light spilled out from under its door, casting an eerie glow in the dark. "That's where it's going," Jack muttered. Inside the warehouse, the air was freezing, like someone had left the freezers running on overdrive. Metal crates were stacked in the corners, each coated with a layer of frost that crept along the floor. Jack's eyes caught a sign on one of the walls. "The edge of ice." Pete tugged at Jack's sleeve, his voice shaking. "We should bounce, man. This is bad. Real bad." Jack shook his head, his grip firm. "If we leave now, no one's ever gonna know what happened to Tommy and Lily." They moved closer to one of the crates, frost crunching under their shoes. Inside was a dark, still figure. "Is that a person?" Pete whispered, barely audible. Jack hesitated, then slowly lifted the lid. Tommy's face stared back at them, frozen in terror. His features twisted and pale. His ice-covered eyes were wide open, staring into nothingness. Both boys jumped back, their breath hitching in unison. Tommy's face stared back at them, frozen in terror, his features twisted and pale. His ice-covered eyes were wide open, staring into nothingness. Both boys jumped back, their breath hitching in unison. "We gotta tell someone," Pete stammered, trembling from both fear and the cold. But before they could move, the warehouse door groaned open. The ice cream man stepped inside. His movements were slow, deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. One hand carried a tub of ice cream. The other gripped something that looked suspiciously like an ice pick. Jack and Pete froze behind the crates, trying to stay invisible. "I know you're here," the ice cream man said, his voice a guttural growl that sent chills down Jack's spine. "Why'd you come?" Pete let out a tiny yelp, and the ice cream man's head snapped in their direction. "Run!" Jack hissed, shoving Pete toward the exit. Pete bolted, his footsteps echoing in the cold warehouse. But Jack stayed put. He needed proof. Hands shaking, he pulled out his camera and snapped a few quick shots of the scene before ducking behind another crate. The ice cream man's heavy steps echoed as he approached the open freezer. "Curious little children," he muttered, slamming the lid shut over Tommy's lifeless body. So sweet, so tempting. Jack felt his heart hammering in his chest, fear rooting him to the spot. He had to get out of there. But how? Jack crouched behind one of the crates, barely daring to breathe. His mind kept screaming, "He knows I'm here." His legs were frozen in place, and the cold in the warehouse seemed to deepen, creeping into his bones. The ice cream man stopped by the freezer where Tommy's frozen body lay. Slowly, he ran his long fingers across the lid, almost like he was caressing it. "Curiosity," he muttered under his breath. "That's what makes kids so delicious." His voice was low and growling, sending chills straight to Jack's core. Jack gritted his teeth, trying to figure out a way out. His eyes landed on a metal rod lying nearby. The ice cream man had his back turned, giving Jack a sliver of a chance. Slowly, Jack reached for the rod, but just as his fingers brushed it, the freezer door let out a loud click, and the monster's head snapped around. "You've been playing hide and seek for a while, kid," he said, his eyes never once meeting Jack's. Jack froze. How did he know? His heart thudded in his chest, and his hand became clammy with sweat despite the freezing cold. The ice cream man began to move slowly around the warehouse, taking deep, predatory breaths, like a hunter sniffing for its prey. Jack pressed himself flat against the cold floor, barely daring to breathe. His plan was simple. Wait for the monster to look away, then make a run for the exit. But those warehouse doors were huge, and Jack didn't think he could open them without a key. Then, it hit him. His camera. Maybe if he could get more footage, it would convince the adults. Jack slowly got to his knees, trying to snap a few shots. The camera's lens caught the ice cream man as he opened another crate. Inside was another frozen figure. A girl Jack didn't recognize. "Ice preserves everything," the ice cream man muttered, his voice echoing through the warehouse. "Their fear, their energy, their taste." The monster spun around suddenly, and their eyes locked. Well, look who we have here," he growled. Jack bolted, the camera almost slipping from his hands. He ran for the exit, but the heavy footsteps behind him told him the ice cream man was already on his tail. The warehouse was a maze of crates, pipes, and freezers, and Jack dashed through it, trying to lose him. The ice cream man moved slowly but with purpose. Jack could feel his cold breath, like an Arctic wind nipping at his back. "You're not getting away," came the deep voice from behind. Jack realized the monster was toying with him. His heart pounded as he sprinted deeper into the warehouse, desperation starting to claw at him. Then he saw it. A massive tank of liquid nitrogen in the far corner. Its lid was slightly open, and nearby lay some tools. The idea hit him like a lightning bolt. Jack grabbed a heavy pipe, wedged it against the tank, and aimed it at the passageway. If he could block the monster's path with this... The ice cream man's footsteps grew louder. The cold in the air intensified, making Jack's teeth chatter. The ice was creeping up on everything. Even his boots were sticking to the floor. When the monster appeared in the passage, Jack yanked the valve with all his strength. Liquid nitrogen sprayed out, bursting into a thick cloud of white fog. The ice cream man howled as the freezing mist burned his fur-covered skin. "You think that's gonna stop me?" he roared. But Jack wasn't backing down. He grabbed a nearby can of gasoline and splashed it across the floor. "This is for Tommy, Lily, and everyone else," he shouted. He fumbled in his pocket, finding his dad's lighter. Jack flicked it. and the flame leapt to life. The flames filled the warehouse, eating up the air. Ice cracked. The floors were covered in steam, and metal surfaces began to melt. The ice cream man howled in pain, but instead of retreating, he charged at Jack. The boy barely dodged. The camera he was holding fell to the floor, and the monster crushed it with a swipe of his clawed hand. "You wanted to survive? You thought you could win?" His voice was full of fury. But Jack wasn't backing down. He grabbed a piece of metal and swung it, hitting the monster across the head. The beast crashed to the floor, growling in agony. "You're just a kid!" the monster screamed, struggling to rise. Jack ran out of the warehouse, the fire already consuming everything inside. He glanced back to make sure the monster didn't follow. A loud, explosive crack echoed behind him, and everything went silent. The town took a long time to recover from that night. The adults found the charred remains of the warehouse, but couldn't explain what had happened. No one believed Jack's story, but the disappearances of the children stopped. Jack knew he had done what he had to do. But one day, while walking down the street, he heard a familiar tune. Turning around, he saw the van. New, shiny, with bright colors. Inside sat the ice cream man, and he was staring directly at Jack.